They shattered his cane, dragged him through the street like it didn't matter, but just 30 minutes later, the FBI hit the biker gang's compound, fast, brutal, and without a word of warning. Why? Because the man they cuffed wasn't some random target. He was Samuel Vincent Ward, ex-Army Ranger, a shadow off the grid, and the last man you should ever lay a finger on. And that 16-second clip, it shattered the quiet and made the whole nation listen. Where are you tuning in from today? Drop it in the comments below. This is Veteran Biker, where some stories don't roar in, they start in silence and then change everything. The sun hadn't yet reached its peak, but the heat on Elridge Square already pressed down like a loaded verdict. A faint shimmer rose from the pavement. Vendors had barely opened their carts, and the town was settling into its usual rhythm, coffee cups in hand, quiet footsteps across dusty sidewalks. But that rhythm snapped when the roar of custom V-twin engines sliced through the morning stillness. 3 matte black motorcycles tore around the corner, tires screeching as they angled into a diagonal stop right in the middle of the crosswalk. The riders wore the insignia of the Hollow Fangs, a biker gang who operated with unchecked authority in Elridge under the guise of community security. The townsfolk didn't look surprised, they looked away. The tallest of the 3 dismounted first, stocky, pale, angular, with a cruel sneer carved into his face like it had been there for decades. He was known as Rig. His sunglasses stayed on even in the shadow. He scanned the square, not with curiosity, but with a hunter's intent, and then he saw him. A black man in his early 70s, dressed simply. Faded olive jacket, brown slacks, and a wooden cane worn smooth by time. He moved slowly, but there was no wobble in his steps. Every motion was deliberate, his gaze focused straight ahead. The insignia patch of the U.S. Army Rangers was barely visible beneath the fold of his coat. His name was Samuel Vincent Ward. Rig stepped into his path, boots wide. "Hey, old-timer!" he barked. His voice had that southern edge, the kind that wrapped slurs in smiles. "What are you doing parading around like you're still in charge of something?" Samuel stopped. His face didn't shift. His eyes moved up, and he answered with a calm, steady tone. "Morning." Rig laughed. The other bikers chuckled too. One leaned against his bike, twirling a chain. Another younger chewed toothpicks, like they were tactical tools. "You military types never learn. Still walking around like your medals mean something," Rig said. "What were you, airborne sewing circle? Combat knitting?" A few nervous laughs from the benches. Someone started filming from across the square. "You finished?" Samuel asked, his voice without bite. Wrong answer. Rig moved fast for a man his size. He grabbed Samuel's wrist and twisted it behind his back. The pop was audible, then the cuffs. Cold steel, unprovoked. Samuel gasped. A sharp breath, but no cry. The cane clattered to the pavement. Resisting arrest, Rig snarled, interfering with an active patrol. "He was just walking," someone shouted. Rig ignored it. He slammed his boot down. The cane snapped clean in two, half of it bouncing into the gutter. Across the square, a voice rang out. Hoarse, aged, but piercing. "He saved my son in Iraq." A white-haired woman stood with both hands clutching a cloth tote bag. Her eyes were sharp with fury. "He's a hero. You bastards wouldn't know courage if it shot you in the boot." Rig turned, hand hovering near his holstered baton. "Back off, ma'am. Interfere again and you'll join him." She didn't move, but she didn't speak again. A few feet away, one bike, younger with hesitation in his jaw, shifted uneasily. He looked at Rig, the acrid man in cuffs. "Hey, Rig," he said carefully, "maybe this is a bit much." Rig shot him a look that sliced through the air. "You questioning orders now? You want to be on sidewalk patrol next month?" The younger biker fell silent. Samuel's hands bled beneath the cuffs. One drop hit the concrete. No one moved. Phones were out, filming, whispering. Then the security camera above the square, the one always touted as the town's safety eye, flickered, then went grey. Technical fault. In the control room, it would be logged as an error. No one would fix it. No one would ask why. Samuel was dragged toward the Hollow Fangs headquarters 2 blocks away, the cane left behind, a broken spine. He didn't scream, he didn't resist, he simply walked, even in cuffs, like someone who had survived fire and refused to bend before smoke. And in the shadow of a forgotten American town, the ground had just cracked, not from gunfire, not from riots, but from one man's silence, because he wasn't just anybody. And 30 minutes later, the FBI would remind Elridge exactly who they had dared to touch. The footage was only 16 seconds long, shaky, unpolished, captured from a bystander's old phone, but it was enough. It began with the sound of boots and ended with the crack of a cane. In between, it showed the Hollow Fangs biker gang detaining a frail, elderly black man with blood dripping from his wrist and nothing in his eyes but quiet resolve. The girl who posted it was 16, sitting on the steps of a bakery across the square, her iced coffee nearly forgotten. She hadn't even meant to film. She just pointed her phone when the shouting started. What she didn't expect was to catch the moment when Samuel Vincent Ward's jacket shifted slightly, revealing a faded Ranger tab sewn to the inside lining. She had no idea what it meant, but someone else did. The video hit 3,000 views in 20 minutes. By the time she got home, it had tripled. A user on X paused the clip at the 8-second mark, zoomed in and enhanced the insignia. A reply followed. "That's a Ranger patch. Looks old, maybe custom stitched. Who is this guy?" Another reply came instantly, more ominous. "I think the better question is, who just put cuffs on him?" At 11:43 a.m., the original post was shared by a verified account known for tracking veterans' rights violations. 10 minutes later, the term #RangerDown began trending. A retired Green Beret from Nevada reposted the video with the caption, "He's one of ours, and they better pray he stays silent." In a hidden Discord channel frequented by former Special Operations officers, a user named Dust03 said only this: "If that patch is real, we just stepped on a landmine." And somewhere deep beneath a federal building in Quantico, Virginia, an automated alert pinged quietly. It came not from social media, but from a small movement, an embedded signal from a biometric device inside Ward's waistband. It hadn't detected a struggle. It had detected stillness. Protocol B-17, unauthorized stillness event. On a monitor in room 4B, a red light blinked. An analyst, mid-30s, pale suit, unreadable face, put down his coffee. He pulled up a secure file, entered a clearance code, and the screen filled with black text on a gray background. Subject, Ward. Samuel Vincent status. Active consultant, frozen classification, level 5. Operational override protection note. Subject YNS not to be detained under any municipal or civilian authority. Breach requires escalation to the Federal Council. The analyst leaned forward. A hollow breath slipped between his teeth. "Oh no," he whispered. "They really did it." He tapped a key. A second screen lit up, files unfurled like dominoes, clearance logs, surveillance overlays, historical operation records redacted by executive privilege. Another line pulsed to life at the bottom. Escalate. Fine, he didn't hesitate. He keyed in Y. Back in Elridge, the Hollow Fangs headquarters sat squat and shadowed between a welding shop and a defunct diner. Inside, Samuel Vincent Ward was locked in a storage room masquerading as a holding cell. The walls were bare except for one security camera that didn't blink anymore. Rigg leaned against the metal door frame, arms crossed, watching Ward with disdain curdled into something like confusion. "You gonna say something yet?" he asked. Samuel sat on the floor, upright, back against the wall. His hands were still cuffed behind him. His breathing was steady, eyes closed. "Come on, old man," Rigg scoffed. "You think you're making some kind of statement with all this silence?" Still no answer. Rigg stepped closer. "You're not at war anymore. You're not some ghost in a jungle. You're in my house now." He leaned down. "You see that patch on my vest? Hollow Fangs run this town, not the army, not the mayor, not the law." Samuel opened his eyes slowly. His gaze didn't move to Rigg, it moved through him. Rigg's smirk faltered. Across town, a young woman named Maya sat at her laptop with the video paused on her screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. The news outlets hadn't picked it up yet, but she wasn't waiting for permission. She had been a junior analyst for a vet rights NGO before getting laid off. Now she ran an anonymous blog. She uploaded a freeze frame, Ward's wrist bleeding, ranger patch half revealed, the outline of a biker boot in motion. Then she wrote one line, "They cuffed the wrong man." It went viral in 15 minutes. At 12:27 p.m., 3 SUVs left a federal operations lot in silence. No markings, no escort. Inside each vehicle, 2 agents sat in full tactical grey. They didn't speak, didn't check their phones. The coordinates were preloaded. The mission was coded as historical asset recovery. Meanwhile, the Hollow Fangs were unraveling. A younger member, Deke, stood in the hallway outside the holding room. He wasn't filming, but he wasn't walking away either. He could hear Rigg inside, pacing, talking to himself more than to Ward. Deke whispered to no one, "This is going bad." Another member walked past, grunted and said, "Not our problem." Deke disagreed. Deep down, he remembered something he hadn't let himself think about in years. Afghanistan, fob justice. The man who pulled him out when everyone else ran. That man had the same eyes as Ward. He sent a single encrypted message to an old contact. "He's here, he's alive." The reply came 30 seconds later, understood. Standing by, in a small office above the biker compound, Rigg sat at a desk cluttered with cigarette butts, bolt cutters, and stacks of fake violation notices. He watched the same 16-second video now looping on a cracked tablet. His fingers twitched. He hated how calm Ward looked, hated how even in pain, even on the ground, even bleeding, the man hadn't flinched. He called out down the hall, "Get me Lena! Now!" A minute later, a tall woman with dark auburn braids and biker leathers stepped into the room. Her face is unreadable. Rigg looked up. That video got out. She didn't react. "I need it gone. You know people. Pull the strings." Lena raised an eyebrow. "We've got bigger problems than social media, boss." Rigg slammed his fist down. "Then fix it." Lena studied him for a beat longer, then said softly, "You picked the wrong target." Then she turned and walked out. At 12:41 p.m., the first FBI SUV entered Elridge County lines. Ward remained motionless but not unaware. Every breath he drew had weight. Every second he kept still was not weakness. It was waiting. In a forgotten corner of his coat, a tiny beacon pulsed once more. And somewhere far away, a room full of men and women in tactical gear, legal offices and encrypted networks began to move. Because Samuel Vincent Ward wasn't just a man, he was a classified asset. And Elridge was about to learn what happens when you lay hands on a man the government never truly released. The town of Elridge had always moved slowly. It was the kind of place where gossip traveled faster than facts, where storefronts hadn't changed in 20 years, and neither had the people behind the counters. But that afternoon something shifted, not visibly, not in sound, but in the pressure that settled over the square, like a thunderstorm waiting for the first crack. Inside the Hollow Fangs compound, Riggs stood by a window, chewing on a splintered toothpick. His nerves had finally started to betray him. The calm that Samuel Vincent Ward had shown, that maddening stillness, was doing more damage than any riot ever could. The silence was spreading. No defiance, no anger, just a quiet that whispered, "You have no idea who you touched." Rigg turned as Lena re-entered the office, this time holding a burner phone. She tossed it on the desk. "You'll want to hear this." He picked it up. On the other end was a voice he recognized, Alvarez, a fixer from the next county over. "You're in deep, Rigg. That man you picked up?" Rigg snapped. "He's nobody." "Wrong," Alvarez replied. "He's a shadow file. That means his records don't exist unless you have triple clearance. I've only seen one like that before, and it didn't end well for the people who laid hands on him." Rigg's knuckles went white. "What the hell does that mean?" Alvarez answered calmly. "It means you need to let him go. Quietly, before they come." But it was too late for quiet. 3 SUVs rolled into town without fanfare, no sirens, no lights, just silent tires on sun-baked roads and black windows reflecting nothing. Locals noticed. Eyes followed, phones hovered, but no one said a word. They just stepped aside. One by one, shopkeepers locked their doors. Kids were pulled inside. Traffic cleared. The agents inside those SUVs weren't ordinary federal operatives. These were part of a program that officially didn't exist. Men and women trained for asset recovery, urban subduals, and information containment. Their directives were not public. Their allegiance was not political. They answered only to the directive codes that blinked in encrypted servers hundreds of miles away. Agent Royce stepped out of the first SUV, late 42nds, bald, lean, and wearing a plain grey suit with tactical boots. No badge, no insignia, only a glint in his right ear from the comms piece and a silver ring on his index finger. Behind him, Agents Mina and Calder moved into position. They swept the area without speaking, their formation too smooth to be casual. At the compound gate, a biker on watch, Tank, burly and sweating under the sun, stood up. "This is private property," he growled. Royce didn't blink. "I'm not here for the property," Tank scoffed. "Then you can turn around." Royce stepped closer, slowly, like someone who'd done this before. "Let me be clear. You're harboring a federally protected individual. This is your one chance to step aside." Tank started to reach for his belt. Royce's hand moved quicker, one subtle shift, and suddenly Tank was face down on the dirt, his arm twisted so efficiently it didn't even seem violent, just inevitable. Royce looked down at him. "That was your answer." Calder opened the gate. Inside, the Hollow Fangs scrambled. Lena heard the commotion first and rushed down the hall. "They're here!" someone yelled. "The feds!" Riggs stormed out of the holding room, his face pale. "How the hell did they find us this fast?" Deke, who had been standing quietly nearby, didn't answer. He just watched as Lena gave Rigg a long, cold stare. "I told you. You picked the wrong target." In the back room, Samuel still hadn't moved, but he heard them now. Boots, orders, steel doors opening. The sound of precision, the sound of people who never had to raise their voices to be obeyed. Royce entered the hallway. Rigg tried to intercept him, barking, "You don't have jurisdiction here." Royce didn't stop walking. "I don't need jurisdiction. I have authority." "You're violating," Rigg began, but Royce stepped within inches of him and said quietly, "You put your hands on a man whose clearance outranks the people you vote for." Rigg froze. Royce pushed past. Mina secured the hallway while Calder went for the door inside the holding room. Ward finally opened his eyes. He looked up at Royce and nodded once. Royce nodded back. "Sir," "We're here to extract." Ward stood slowly. His joints cracked, his wrists still bled. Royce reached for the cuffs, but Ward raised one hand. "Leave them, let them see." Royce hesitated, then stepped back. Ward walked past him, out into the hall, bleeding, silent, unbroken. Every biker they passed, they averted their eyes. Even Rig. Outside, the townspeople watched as the federal agents surrounded the compound. Ward stepped into the sunlight like a ghost returning to the living. A boy near the bakery gasped, "That's him." A woman whispered, "They came for him. They really came." Ward paused, looked around, saw the broken cane still lying in the gutter where it had been crushed. He picked it up, and with it in his hand, he walked down the street with 3 black SUVs in silent escort. The whole town watched, and none of them would ever see that street the same way again. But this wasn't over, because in Washington, someone had just received a call, and they were not pleased that Samuel Vincent Ward had been touched at. When the black SUVs left Elridge, the town stood still. No one cheered, no one shouted, but everyone remembered it would take less than 20 minutes for the footage of Samuel Vincent Ward walking out in cuffs, flanked by silent agents, holding his broken cane, to spread across the internet. From veterans forums to encrypted private channels, from academic listservs to government backdoors, the image of him upright, bleeding and defiant began to echo far beyond Elridge. In a quiet corridor beneath Capitol Hill, Senator Alana Merrick stared at her phone. She hadn't seen Ward in decades, not since the tribunal in '94. She called her chief of staff. "Get me SecDef," she said, "and scrub all mentions of Elridge from our internal memos. If the press gets wind of this before we control the narrative, we'll have a full-scale operational embarrassment." In a private hangar just outside Quantico, the agents escorted Samuel aboard a matte grey transport jet. Inside, the cabin wasn't luxurious, just sterile, clinical. Royce offered a seat. Ward remained standing. "I don't need you to explain," Ward said quietly, "but I do need to know who made the call." Royce exchanged a glance with Mina. The protocol tripped on its own. No one made the call. The system did. Ward nodded slowly. "So they buried me and wired the grave." "No, sir," Royce said carefully. "They buried the world. You were the warning sign." For several minutes, no one spoke. Ward finally sat, resting his broken cane across his knees. His wrists still bled, though someone had wrapped them in gauze. Meanwhile, back in Elridge, Rig wasn't speaking to anyone. Not even Lena, not even Deke. He sat alone in the back office, eyes fixed on a small monitor that played the video of Ward's arrest on a loop. The audio was off, but the impact wasn't. Rig's face, once smug, now twitched every time Ward appeared on screen. Lena stood in the doorway. "You screwed us," she said, calm, not angry, just a plain truth. Rig didn't respond. "You know who that man was now?" she asked. Still nothing. "We're not a gang anymore, Rig. We're a case study." He stood abruptly. "I didn't know. You didn't ask," she replied. "That's worse." Downstairs, Deke packed his bag. He didn't speak to the others. He just left his patch on the table and walked out. No one stopped him. In Washington, a more serious meeting was underway. Inside the Pentagon, in a windowless room marked Oasis, Operational Asset Security and Intelligence Strategy, 5 men and women reviewed a projected image of Samuel Vincent Ward. One of them, a civilian in a tan suit, said, "He hasn't been operational since '99. Another replied, "His clearance is still active." And that signal override pulled 5 flags from dormant systems. A woman with grey hair in a severe bun leaned forward. If someone was testing a response window, this was the perfect bait. "And if it wasn't a test?" someone asked. Then came silence. Finally, the chair of the room, a man known only as Mercer, spoke. "Reinstate him," he said. Everyone turned. "You want him back in the field?" "No," Mercer replied. "I want them to know he could be on board the transport." Royce received a message on his secure device. He read it, hesitated, then showed it to Ward. Ward didn't smile, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "They want me visible again," he said. "No," Royce corrected. "They want you remembered." By morning, Ward's image had been dissected 1,000 ways. Some saw a hero, others saw a symbol, a few saw a threat. A segment ran on a late-night military channel. Who is Samuel Vincent Ward, and why did a silent arrest shake the federal chain of command? Another on a conspiracy site read, "Deep State Ghost Walks Free." Is he the last line or the first sign? Somewhere in Montana, a retired sniper made a phone call. "He's alive," he said. "We owe him." In Detroit, a former cyber warfare officer reactivated a long-dormant server cluster. In Los Angeles, a former Intel interrogator wrote a single post, "Let me know when you need me." A map on a military base in Kansas began to light up, small red dots pulsing across states, each one marking a man or woman who had once followed Samuel Vincent Ward into impossible terrain and came back because of him. But not everyone was celebrating. A group of private contractors, blacklisted paramilitary operatives with histories buried deeper than most federal databases, watched the video with less reverence. One of them, a scarred man named Grayson, crushed a cigarette under his boot. "If he's out," he said, "then some things we buried might come clawing back." Another nodded. "We have to make sure he doesn't remember everything." "Or," Grayson said, "make sure he doesn't get the chance." Back at the federal facility, Ward stood in front of a wall of monitors. Royce walked up beside him. "We traced the camera outage in Elridge," Royce said. "Intentional. Someone inside the biker gang has military-grade jamming software." Ward didn't respond immediately. "That means someone knew what I was, or guessed. Which means someone wanted this to happen," Royce added. Ward turned to face him. "Then we find out who. But not with a file. With presence." "You want to go back?" Royce asked. "No," Ward said. "I want them to see me walking free. I want them to wonder who protected me, and why." Royce nodded. "We'll set the stage." Ward looked at his broken cane, now replaced with a sturdier one, reinforced but identical in design. "They broke this," he said. "That's personal. That's war," Royce corrected. In Elridge, whispers began to grow. The bakery where the video was filmed saw a crowd the next morning. Tourists, veterans, local news vans. They weren't protesting, they were watching. By noon, a makeshift memorial had formed at the corner of the square. Someone placed a replica of Ward's broken cane in the exact spot it had fallen. Others lit candles, flags were laid gently on the sidewalk. And by the end of the day, the mayor of Elridge, a man who had once looked the other way whenever Hollow Fangs patrolled, released a statement. "We regret the actions taken against Mr. Ward. We are cooperating with federal authorities to ensure justice is served." But it wasn't enough. Ward knew it. So did the people who followed him once and were preparing to do so again. Because this wasn't about one town, it was about every silent man and woman whose dignity had been trampled and whose name had been forgotten. And now, because someone dared to put cuffs on Samuel Vincent Ward, they were all waking up. The question wasn't whether the system would respond, it was whether it could handle what was coming. And in the shadows, Ward's enemies began to move. The night after Samuel Vincent Ward's extraction, Elridge didn't sleep. Not truly. The lights stayed on longer than usual. The diner served coffee till 3 a.m., and locals who had kept their heads down for years suddenly found themselves whispering about things they never dared say aloud. The Hollow Fangs clubhouse sat dark. Rigg was still inside, pacing like a man waiting for a sentence he hadn't yet heard but already knew was coming. Outside, graffiti had started to appear on nearby walls. Not tags or slurs, but stenciled images. Ward's silhouette with his cane, the ranger insignia ghosted behind him, and the words still standing. 1,000 miles away, inside a military safe house in Virginia, Ward sat in a modest room, no windows, just a desk, a bed, and a reinforced door. His wrists were healing, though the pain hadn't left. Neither had the silence. Royce entered with a tray, coffee, fruit, and files. "We found something," he said, placing a sealed folder in front of Ward. Ward opened it. Inside were stills from the Elridge camera logs, not the corrupted footage, but reconstructed fragments from surveillance backups. One of them showed a shadow near the utility pole 30 seconds before the camera failed. Another showed a biker, separate from the arrest, placing a black box on the rear signal line. Ward studied the biker. "Not from the gang?" Royce nodded. "Not officially. Name's Devon Slate, former communications tech, Army Signals Division. Went AWOL 5 years ago. No record since. But he's got ties to a contractor flagged in the Red Garden files." Ward closed the folder, so this wasn't a random mistake. It was bait. Royce looked unsettled. "Looks that way." Ward stood, stretched, and walked to the reinforced door. "Then we answer." "Sir, Mercer hasn't authorized reactivation." "I'm not asking to be reactivated," Ward said. "I'm asking to visit a friend." 2 hours later, a private aircraft touched down on a rural airstrip outside Huntsville. Waiting beside a dusty hangar was a woman in her 60s, wearing jeans, a battered field jacket, and a ranger tab stitched over her heart. Her name was Marla Kane. Ward stepped off the plane and into her embrace. They hadn't spoken in 12 years. "You idiot," she muttered, holding him tight. "You said you'd stay dead." "I was," Ward said. "Someone brought me back." Marla led him into her cabin, a reinforced wood lodge hidden behind acres of pine. Inside were old photographs, medals, satellite phones, and 2 disassembled rifles on a kitchen table. Over black coffee, Ward briefed her on everything: the bikers, the silent arrest, the shadow jammer, and Slate. Marla whistled. "So someone out there knew who you were and tried to flush the system. They failed," Ward said. "Now we make sure they don't try again." Meanwhile, in Elridge, the biker gang was imploding. Lena had gathered the remaining members, those still loyal, those too scared to leave. "We have a problem," she told them. "It's not just the feds, it's bigger. The moment Rigg touched Ward, we triggered something none of you understand." Rigg sat in the back, silent. "You think we're untouchable," Lena continued, "but Ward isn't just a man. He's a line, and we crossed it." Deke looked up. "So what do we do?" Lena's face was steel. "We disappear, or we burn." But Rigg stood. "No," he said. "We own it. We show them we're not afraid." Lena turned. "You think this is about fear? You think this is about pride? We're not in control anymore, Rigg. We're a target. You can run." Rigg snapped. "I'm not." She stared at him. "Then you'll be a monument. And not the kind that gets flowers." That night, in a private terminal at Dulles International, a tall man in a brown overcoat stepped off a foreign charter. He walked like a diplomat, but scanned like a predator. His name was Edgar Strathmore, and he had once led the most classified rendition teams in American history, until he disappeared during a failed black site operation in Eastern Europe. His files were sealed, his clearance was revoked, but now he was back. At his side was Devon Slate. "Did he take the bait?" Strathmore asked. Slate nodded. "More than that, they reactivated his Halo protocols. The net is wide open. Then we press harder," Strathmore said, "and we start with the ghosts that still follow him." Back in Huntsville, Ward and Marla were mapping connections. They used no Wi-Fi, no digital traces, just corkboards, paper trails, and human memory. For every red dot pinned, there was a name behind it, a vet, a contact, a whisper from a forgotten war. One of them was Andre Knox, an ex-recon sniper living off the grid in Colorado. Another was Shiloh Reeves, a former codebreaker in New York who now ran a public library and hacked federal firewalls in her downtime. "They won't all answer," Marla warned. "They don't have to," Ward replied. "Just enough to show we're still awake." In Elridge, a new video leaked. This time it wasn't from a bystander. It was body cam footage, illegally obtained, showing the moment Ward was thrown down. The biker boot, the blood, the broken cane, but also, in the corner, a faint distorted image of Slate walking away. The leak went viral. News anchors started asking real questions. That same night, Marla's cabin was breached, but no one got in. Perimeter alarms went off, and the intruders vanished before the cameras reset. It was a message. "They're watching," Marla said. "They're trying to scare us," Ward said. "We need to go loud." By morning, a new site launched, projectstillness.net. It featured nothing but names, faces, photos of veterans who'd been wronged, silenced, discarded, and in the middle of it all, Samuel Vincent Ward, standing tall, holding his broken cane. The site got 5 million hits in 3 hours, and in a steel tower in D.C., Senator Merrick watched the numbers rise. "Shut it down," she told her aide. "We can't," he replied. "It's mirrored across 1,000 nodes." She turned, then shut him down. The aide hesitated. "He has protection now, not just federal, he has people." Merrick stared out the window. "Then we remind them who builds the walls around their protection." Ward was no longer hiding, he was moving. From Huntsville to Chicago, then New Orleans. He walked into VA offices, shook hands with forgotten soldiers, stood quietly outside courthouses where vets fought eviction notices, and left no speech, only presence. Cameras followed, people whispered, and the system that once discarded him now trembled at his return. Because Samuel Vincent Ward wasn't calling for war, he was calling to memory. And that, to the people who tried to erase him, was the most dangerous thing of all. By the third day, Samuel Vincent Ward had become a movement, not by design, not by speech, but by sheer force of presence. He didn't tour with cameras. He didn't hold press conferences. Instead, he walked quietly, steadily from one forgotten corner of the country to another, visiting shelters, battered clinics, burned-out training fields. Wherever he went, he stood. And when people asked why, he simply said, "To remember." In Chicago, he waited in line at a VA processing center for 3 hours, refusing to be moved ahead, talking to the amputee beside him as if they had fought the same war, which in some ways they had. In Baton Rouge, he ate beside 3 homeless veterans beneath an underpass and left them with nothing but a salute and a name. Not his, theirs. His image was now everywhere, but it wasn't because he pushed it. It was because people who once had no voice saw themselves in his silence. In a closed-door meeting at the Department of Veterans Affairs, panic brewed. We have 47 regional administrators reporting public unrest tied to Ward's appearances. A middle-aged deputy muttered, flipping pages. In several states, civil complaints have been filed citing unequal treatment after his image went viral. There's pressure from the media to reopen old misconduct cases. The Secretary of Veterans Affairs leaned forward, frowning. Is he calling for action? No, the deputy replied. He's calling for memory. The secretary exhaled. That's worse. Meanwhile, the hollow fangs were collapsing. Deke had vanished entirely. Lena had gone underground, leaving only a voicemail for the remaining members: disband or die out. Either way, our name is finished. Rigg, however, remained. He'd barricaded himself in the compound, convinced that he could still claw his way back into control, but he was running out of time. In a parking lot behind a liquor store, Devon Slate met with Edgar Strathmore. The air between them was tight. He's doing more damage walking in silence than any rally could, Slate said. They're listening to him because he doesn't speak. Strathmore lit a cigarette, letting the smoke blur his expression. We need a pivot. We framed him as a relic. That failed. We tried silence. It became his weapon. So now we give them a scandal. Slate frowned. You want to plant something? No, Strathmore said. We resurrect something. Find the op that got buried in '94, the one that was redacted under congressional seal. Pull a thread, twist the memory, make him doubt himself, make the world question what he remembers. Slate looked uneasy. If we do that, we're opening doors even you couldn't close. Strathmore dropped the cigarette. Then let them swing. At the same moment, in a remote farmhouse outside Amarillo, Ward sat with Marla and Andre Knox, the former recon sniper. Knox had arrived that morning, silent as a breeze, carrying only a duffel bag and an old spotting scope. We're being watched, Knox said without preamble. Ward nodded. Let them. Marla tapped the table. They're tracking your pattern, and if Strathmore's involved, it's only a matter of time before they play dirty. Ward opened a file Royce had forwarded, a single image from 1994, grainy and grey. It showed Ward in a desert combat zone, standing over a group of civilians. The context was gone, so were the names. But now someone had added a subtitle, Undisclosed Civilian Casualties Under Ward's Command. Knox cursed. They're manufacturing guilt. No, Ward said quietly. They're weaponizing memory. That night, the story broke on a fringe outlet disguised as independent news. Within hours, it was trending on all major platforms. Is the man behind the silence hiding a darker truth? One headline read. Another, hero or ghost. The truth about Samuel Ward's forgotten op. But something unexpected happened. Instead of damaging his image, the scandal provoked questions and loyalty. Veterans who had served with him started to post their own memories. None addressed the operation directly, but all spoke to Ward's leadership, his decisions, his integrity. One post by a former field medic read, "He carried 3 men out of hell. 2 of them lived. The third was me." Another from a supply officer, "He once gave up his own extraction window to save a convoy. I wouldn't be typing this if he hadn't." And then came the real blowback. An anonymous leak dropped a new file, a declassified memo written by a congressman's aide in '94, stating that the operation had been deemed tactically unavoidable and heroically executed under volatile circumstances. The narrative shifted again, and this time it didn't swing back. In Washington, Senator Merrick slammed her hand on the table. He's not just surviving the attacks, he's converting them. Her advisor looked pale. He's turning doubt into proof. Every time we hit him, the public digs deeper and finds more to admire. Then make it hurt, Merrick snapped. Find the weakness. There's always a weakness. But there was only one weakness left, and it wasn't Samuel. It was the silence of those who once betrayed him. In the weeks that followed, Ward's quiet pilgrimage continued. In Denver, he stood outside a VA hospital that had been cited for malpractice but never held accountable. He didn't protest. He just waited there every day, 8 hours a day for a week. On the 8th day, the regional director resigned. In Memphis, he visited the widow of a fallen ranger, sat with her, listened, promised nothing. By now, he wasn't alone. Other veterans had begun walking too, some with visible wounds, some with none. All of them are silent. They called themselves the Line. No banners, no speeches, just formation. From Maine to Texas, silent gatherings formed. Street corners, hospital entrances, courthouse steps, and always at the center, a silhouette with a cane. Sometimes it was Ward, sometimes not, but the shape was always the same. Strathmore, watching from a private surveillance suite, hissed through his teeth. He's not leading a movement. He's reminding people how to stand. Slate replied quietly, "We underestimated the cost of forgetting." Strathmore turned. Then maybe it's time they remember fear instead. But what came next wasn't fear. It was reckoning. In Elridge, a federal task force quietly entered the Hollow Fangs compound. No resistance, no press, just a clean sweep. Inside, they found weapons caches, fake IDs, laundering ledgers, and a file-marked slate containing blueprints of blackout devices and payment logs. The local sheriff issued a brief statement. The era of unaccountability in Elridge has ended, and for the first time in decades, the square fell quiet for the right reasons. Ward stood alone in the cemetery behind a small church in Virginia. A new headstone had just been placed. It read, "Private Michael Ward, son, brother, never forgotten." He placed a ranger pin on top. Royce stood beside him. "You never mentioned him." Ward's voice was rough. "They erased more than my service. They erased what I protected." Royce nodded. "It's almost time." Ward looked toward the road. Let them come. Because by now the country wasn't watching to see what he would do next. They were watching to see what he would endure. And Samuel Vincent Ward had never flinched in the face of history. Not when it tried to define him, not when it tried to forget him, and not when it tried to silence him again. The morning was grey when Samuel Vincent Ward arrived in Atlanta. Rain had started sometime around dawn, a soft drizzle that washed over the city like a cleansing ritual. He stepped off the train with nothing more than his reinforced cane and a folded note in his jacket pocket. No fanfare, no escort. But the moment his boots hit the platform, 4 veterans waiting on a bench stood silently and joined his walk. They said nothing, just walked. Atlanta had been chosen for a reason. It was the site of the upcoming National Defense and Security Summit, a gathering of government officials, defense contractors, and military brass. Ward didn't have an invitation. He didn't need one. He wasn't going to the summit. He was going up the steps. By midday, Ward had reached the front of the convention center. He stood at the base of the marble steps and waited. The veterans who followed him lined up behind, one by one. Others joined, former medics, engineers, scouts, spouses of the fallen. Within an hour, the crowd had grown into the hundreds. No chants, no signs, just silence. Inside, Senator Alana Merrick glanced nervously at her tablet as a security aide leaned over. "He's here," the aide whispered. Merrick's jaw tightened. "On the schedule? No, on the stairs." She didn't move, but her fingers tightened around her pen until it cracked. In a surveillance van 2 blocks away, Slate monitored the growing crowd. He stared at the heat signatures blooming across the screen. "He's not leading a protest," he muttered. "He's leading gravity." Strathmore sat across from him, eerily calm. "Then we disrupt gravity." Slate looked uneasy. "How?" Strathmore slid a black case across the table. Inside, a media pack, doctored documents, falsified psychiatric evaluations, and a pre-recorded audio file. "We release this anonymously to the press, frame it as a long-term breakdown, paint him as delusional, traumatized, a danger to himself and others." Slate hesitated. "People know him." Strathmore didn't blink. "They think they do." Back at the summit, a young reporter received a leaked file on her encrypted drop. She scanned it once, twice, then she froze. Her editor was calling within minutes. "Do not publish," he ordered. "Verify everything." Twice, she glanced out the window, watching the silent gathering grow. "If this is false, we're accessories. If it's true, we're targets," the editor replied. "Your call." By late afternoon, Ward hadn't moved. His coat was soaked, his boots were caked in street grime, but he stood as if time had no power over him. Marla joined from the west side, slipping beside him without a word. Andre Knox appeared 30 minutes later, nodding once as he took position. They had come back. The summit continued inside glass walls, revealing opulent lighting, clinking glasses and voices debating national security budgets, without once mentioning the people who'd paid the cost of those policies in flesh. A contractor executive stepping out for a smoke saw the crowd and snorted. "What are they hoping to achieve? Silence doesn't change policy." Someone beside him muttered, "It built this country." At 5:03 p.m., the reporter from earlier published a thread. "This morning, I received a file attempting to discredit Samuel Vincent Ward. It claimed mental instability, fabricated reports, and false history. I cross-checked every document. They were all manipulated. Here's the truth. Her thread went viral in 11 minutes. The backlash was immediate. Hashtags exploded. Former military operatives began posting their own evidence countering the smear attempt. One showed a citation signed by a general whose name had been redacted in the leaked file. Another posted audio of a mission briefing where Ward's leadership was praised under fire. But the most powerful post came from a young man named Reggie Alston, a civilian whose father had served under Ward. When my dad died, I got a box in the mail, no return address. Just my father's dog tags and a letter saying, "He kept us alive. Now we keep you remembered." That letter was signed SVW. Inside the summit, Merrick exploded. "This is getting out of hand," her aide stammered. "Ma'am, they're chanting now." She turned slowly. "What?" "They're not saying anything, but they're humming." On the steps outside, a low, rhythmic hum had begun, barely audible, yet powerful. It wasn't organized, it wasn't planned, but it is deep and resonant, like the heartbeat of a storm. Ward didn't hum, he just listened. Strathmore, watching from the van, stiffened. "We pulled the plug." Slate stared. "You mean?" Strathmore picked up the burner phone. "Initiate blackout protocol." At 5:34 p.m., the power grid around the convention center flickered, then died. Phones froze, cameras blinked out, broadcasts cut to black. For 15 seconds, downtown Atlanta went dark, and in that darkness the humming continued. Then, without a cue, someone lit a flare. Red light bathed the marble steps. Dozens of others lit their own, blue, white, gold. The veterans, the spouses, the forgotten, the witnesses, they lit the silence. Ward looked out across the crowd. He didn't raise a fist. He didn't bow. He just stood, unshaken, unmoved. And at the edge of the summit doors, Senator Merrick saw him silhouetted in firelight, and she finally understood. She hadn't buried him. She'd planted him. And now the country was growing around him. The blackout ended abruptly, but the silence it left behind lingered longer than the dark. As the power returned, cameras flickered back to life and caught what they had missed. Samuel Vincent Ward, unmoved, surrounded by men and women whose faces were lit by the dying embers of signal flares. No violence, no chants, just a stillness that now frightened power more than any riot ever could. Inside the summit, most attendees found reasons to leave early. Sponsors retracted statements. Contractors declined photo ops. By midnight, half the speakers scheduled for the next day had withdrawn. The summit would continue, but its authority had already unraveled. Senator Merrick's suite was in disarray. She paced while a team of aides tried to make sense of what had just happened. "Is he still out there?" she barked. An aide checked his tablet. "Yes. And the crowd hasn't moved. They're sleeping on the steps. Who the hell sleeps on marble in the rain?" "Veterans," the aide replied softly. Merrick stopped pacing. In a dim hallway, a janitor found an envelope taped beneath a sink. No stamp, no address, just the initials SVW. Inside was a single sentence: "You can cover a grave, but the roots still reach." He turned it in. The note vanished into a file labeled Artifact, Class D. But some things weren't meant to be buried. Elsewhere in Atlanta, Devon Slate stood alone on a rooftop, watching the lights return one block at a time. The blackout hadn't stopped anything, it had crystallized it. He lit a cigarette, then crushed it out before the first drag. His hands shook. Behind him, a voice said, "It's over." He turned to see Lena, former second-in-command of the Hollow Fangs, wearing civilian clothes, a duffel slung over her shoulder. "You've got 30 seconds to explain what this was," she said. Slate's jaw tensed. "We were supposed to discredit him. That's all." A controlled response. He didn't retaliate, Lena said, and somehow that turned into a national storm. Slate said nothing. He stood still, she added, and we were the ones that moved. She dropped a burner phone at his feet. You're on your own now. 2 days later, in a small town outside Austin, Ward sat at a diner with a man known only as Silas, once a field strategist, now a mechanic. They talked about maps, not battles, about how you learn more from watching a road than walking it. Strathmore's still moving, Silas said, but his reach is thinning. Every time he tries to control the narrative, it fractures. Ward nodded. Because people aren't listening to him anymore. They're listening to themselves. What's the next step? Silas asked. Ward looked out the window. We stop reacting. We start remembering out loud. The next day, across the country, murals began appearing. On brick walls, alleyways, and subway tunnels. Not vandalism, art. Each image featured a figure with a cane standing in front of a rising horizon. Sometimes it had Ward's face, sometimes it didn't, but the posture was always the same. Below each painting, the same 2 words, still standing. Reporters called it the silent movement. Sociologists wrote essays. Think tanks scrambled to categorize it. But for Ward and those who knew the truth, it wasn't a movement, it was a reckoning. At a private meeting in Langley, analysts presented their findings to top intelligence officials. This is unlike anything we've tracked before, one said. No central leadership, no funding trail, no agenda. It's not activism, another added. It's memory with momentum, and that was what made it dangerous. Strathmore knew it too. He was running out of time. His network was thinning. Slate had gone dark. Merrick was under investigation for ethics violations. And Ward, he just kept walking. So Strathmore played his last card. In Kansas City, at a memorial dedicated to a ranger unit lost overseas, Ward made a stop. No speech, just a visit. He placed a single coin at the base of the statue. The next morning, the statue was vandalized, covered in red paint, a slur scrawled across the bronze. The media spun it. Extremists blamed the silent gatherings. But before any narrative could take hold, something happened. Ward returned. Not with the police, not with the press, just with a rag and a bucket. And slowly, methodically, he cleaned the statue. Veterans joined, locals too, and within hours the memorial gleamed again, surrounded by flowers, candles, and a hand-painted sign that read, "You can't desecrate memory." Strathmore watched the broadcast in silence. He knew then the war he'd tried to reignite was already lost, not because he had been beaten, but because no one was fighting him anymore. They were remembering. And memory, when shared, was harder to bury than any truth. That night, Samuel Vincent Ward received a call. No name, no location, just a voice. They're pulling Strathmore's files. He'll be gone by morning. Merrick too. You started something we can't contain. Ward said nothing. The voice continued. What do you want now? Ward looked out across a small park where children played, where no cameras rolled and no headlines waited. He finally spoke, nothing, and hung up. Because it was never about power, it was about dignity. And once restored, it didn't need a throne, it just needed room to stand. The days that followed were strangely quiet. Not in the way of silence, but in the way storms feel before they strike. The kind of quiet that seems to hold its breath. Samuel Vincent Ward had disappeared again. No tweets, no sightings, just an absence that stirred more speculation than any headline. Some thought he'd gone to Washington. Others said he was in Arizona, visiting old unit graves. But no one knew. And that somehow made his presence feel even louder. The murals kept spreading. In Baltimore, one appeared beneath a freeway overpass overnight, 30 feet high, with the figure painted in grayscale against a backdrop of stars. In Portland, another took form on the side of a library. In Miami, it was traced in mosaic. Always the same image, the cane, the stance, the silhouette of resolve, and always the same words, still standing. It had become more than a message. It was a mirror, and the country, forced to look into it, was beginning to see its reflection clearly, scars and all. At the Bureau of Internal Security Review, a closed-door session was held regarding Senator Merrick's involvement in the smear attempts, classified black ops programs, and connections to off-book intelligence channels. She didn't show up. Instead, her letter of resignation was hand-delivered by an anonymous courier. No apology. Just 4 words scribbled on the envelope: "You can't erase him." The hearing proceeded without her. Devon Slate was found 2 days later at a remote checkpoint near the Montana-Canada border. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. In his backpack were 2 burner phones, several files, and a photograph of Samuel Ward, creased, faded, and signed in blue ink to the man who watched. When asked about the message, Slate only said, "I thought I was looking through the lens. Turns out I was in the frame." Meanwhile, in a veterans hospital in St. Louis, a nurse turned on the morning news and saw something she hadn't expected. Ward, not in a confrontation, not at a protest, but sitting in the garden outside the hospital, alone, feeding birds. She rushed outside. He smiled. She asked if he needed anything. He said no, just sunlight. The image went viral in minutes, not because it was dramatic, but because it was human. That same morning, a group of school children arrived to visit patients. They saw Ward sitting there and approached. One girl, maybe 10 years old, offered him a handmade card. It read, "Thank you for standing still. It helped us move." He held it for a long time, didn't speak, then placed it gently in the inner pocket of his jacket. In Washington, Royce received a directive. Clearance level, Omega. Subject, full declassification and public acknowledgement of Operation Ember Veil, the long-buried mission tied to Ward's record. Royce stared at the file, then the signatures beneath it. "I never thought I'd see this day," he said aloud. His aide, a young woman in a crisp grey suit, looked nervous. "Do you want to issue a statement?" Royce shook his head. "No. Let the record speak for itself. It did." By nightfall, the full archive was made public. It told a story of tactical brilliance, painful losses, and decisions made in fire. It confirmed Ward's leadership and the lives he saved. It is named allies. It is named ghosts. But most importantly, it shattered the myth of failure. The country now saw the truth. And truth, once visible, doesn't retreat. In Elridge, the town square, once feared, became a sanctuary. Locals gathered where Ward had first been taken. Children played by the memorial bench, now placed in his honor. A plaque was fixed beside it, for the man who stood when silence was loudest. No ceremony had been planned, but people came anyway. Someone played a harmonica, someone else read a poem, and as the sun set, one by one, they stood. No one said why, no one needed to. Samuel Vincent Ward eventually returned to Virginia, to the cabin, to the quiet. He repaired the split cane by hand, polished it dot rest by the fireplace. Then he sat, alone, and listened, not to the world, but to the stillness within it. Because his job wasn't to lead, it was to remind, and reminders don't shout. They wait, they endure, they stand still. The world had a short memory, but not this time. 2 weeks after the full declassification of Operation Ember Veil, a congressional resolution passed unanimously. It established a national day of remembrance for all unsung veterans who had served in classified missions, many of whom had lived and died without acknowledgement. The proposal was nicknamed Ward's Day before the ink even dried. Samuel Vincent Ward didn't attend the ceremony. He wasn't in Washington. He wasn't even in the state. Instead, he stood on a wooden bridge overlooking a narrow creek in rural Georgia, where a small plaque once bore the names of 4 soldiers killed in an unreported ambush. He added a 5th name that day, one that had been left off, a scout who bled out saving Ward's life in 1987. He laid a folded flag on the railing, bowed his head, and left before anyone could take a photo. The cameras found him anyway. By now, Ward had become more than a man. He was a living pressure point in the national conscience, a mirror that leaders, civilians, and soldiers couldn't ignore, not because he demanded anything, but because he didn't. And in a world addicted to noise, stillness had become the most deafening sound. At the FBI headquarters, Agent Roy stood before a closed session of internal review officials. A large screen behind him showed headlines, testimonies, and viral footage. And at the center, Ward's face. "We didn't make him a symbol," Royce said. "We tried to contain him. And in doing so, we gave people something unshakable. We gave them honesty, raw, inconvenient, and unstoppable." One board member asked, "Do you believe he poses a threat?" Royce answered, "Only to systems built on silence." The room went still. That week, the last remnants of the Hollow Fangs were arrested. One member turned state's witness and handed over years of audio logs, videos, and financial trails tying the biker gang to a network of protection rackets, black market arms sales, and data laundering operations spanning 3 states. At the center of it, the name Devon Slate, now officially listed as rogue domestic operator. In court, when asked why he turned, the witness said, "Because the man they broke walked straighter than we ever did." In Texas, Ward visited a former Army mechanic named Juno Martinez, who had been denied veteran benefits due to a clerical discrepancy. Ward didn't call the press. He didn't issue a complaint. He walked into the claims office, asked for the supervisor, and sat down in the lobby with Martinez beside him. They waited 6 hours. The claim was approved the next day. At a university in New York, a professor opened her class with a quote, "He changed the country not by leading it, but by refusing to abandon it." Her students had read about Ward not through assigned texts, but from each other, in group chats, in forums, through images passed like heirlooms of a new consciousness. Ward's cabin in Virginia received no visitors, but letters poured in, thousands. Some were written in crayon, others in cursive from trembling hands. One child wrote, "You made my grandpa stop yelling at the news. He just watches you now." Another read, "I stood still in court when they called me a liar. I thought of you, and I didn't move. Strathmore vanished. No charges, no trials, just gone. Some said he fled the country. Others claimed he'd been absorbed into a darker branch of intelligence. But those who understood history didn't chase ghosts. They watched the air for shifts, because shadows leave traces, and Ward had taught them how to see." One early morning, long before sunrise, Ward arrived at a small school in South Carolina. He knocked gently and was let in by a custodian who recognized him instantly. "What brings you here, sir?" Ward gestured to a wall of photos, former students, military enlistees, community leaders. At the bottom, there was a frame with a cracked glass panel and a missing photo. He pulled a small picture from his coat, slid it into the frame, smoothed the glass, then nodded to finish what they started. The custodian asked, "What did they start?" Ward turned. The memory of being counted in California during a city council meeting about reallocating homeless veteran housing funds. A woman stood up during public comment. She held no documents, wore no uniform, just carried a replica of Ward's cane. "They didn't ask for statues," she said. "They asked for room to heal. Let's not wait for another symbol to show up on our doorstep. We already have one. The proposal passed unanimously." On a farm in Oregon, a veteran named Clark, who hadn't spoken in 5 years due to PTSD, began attending group therapy after watching footage of Ward's silent stand. When asked what changed, he said, "I realized silence wasn't absence, it was armor." And somewhere in an empty chapel in Mississippi, Ward lit a candle. No one saw him enter, no one saw him leave, but someone found the candle hours later, still burning, next to a Bible, open to a verse underlined in black ink, and having done all, to stand. Samuel Vincent Ward never wrote a memoir, he never accepted interviews, but in every town he walked through, someone remembered. Someone stood straighter. Someone fell silent, not because they were afraid, but because they had found the strength to hold their ground. And in that quiet, the country found something it had forgotten: its spine. Still, upright, unapologetic. Because Samuel never asked to be remembered, he asked to be seen. And now finally he was... The wind stirred gently across the National Mall as dawn crept over Washington. For the first time in decades, a section of the reflecting pool had been drained, not for repair, but for reflection. Workers were installing a circular platform at its center, surrounded by transparent panels, engraved with the names of covert units and missions previously buried by national silence. At the heart of the platform, a single bronze silhouette stood, not a statue, but a frame. Empty, save for the shape of a man with a cane facing the Capitol. The memorial wasn't for Samuel Vincent Ward, it was because of him. The dedication wasn't scheduled for another week. Yet by 6 a.m., hundreds had already arrived. Not politicians, not media, just people. Some carried flags, others brought dog tags, photos, and old field journals. One woman brought a folded paper crane with the words, "We remember what you wouldn't let us forget." In a building nearby, Royce watched the gathering from a window. He hadn't spoken to Ward since the day they declassified Ember Vale, but he thought of him often, not as a symbol, but as a compass. An aide approached. "Do we have confirmation he'll be attending?" Royce shook his head. "He doesn't attend things, but it's his memorial." Royce turned. "No, it's ours. He just reminded us we needed one." That same morning, across the country in New Mexico, Ward stood in a desert graveyard, facing a headstone with no name, just coordinates. Beneath the sand, the remains of a man who had once shielded his unit from mortar fire with his body. Unacknowledged, unrecorded, but not forgotten. Ward knelt, pressed his palm to the sand, and whispered something no mic could capture. Then rose and walked away, leaving behind a small wooden token etched with the words, "You were counted." Back in Washington, the crowd around the memorial grew. Someone began humming, low, resonant, familiar. Within moments, dozens joined. No lyrics, just that now familiar sound of strength unspoken. A little girl climbed onto her father's shoulders. She pointed to the frame at the center. "Is that him?" she asked. Her father replied, "That's all of them." In a town hall in Iowa, a mayor signed a resolution to convert a former police outpost into a center for veteran transition housing. The room applauded. At the back, a Vietnam vet in his 80s stood, eyes wet, and said, "I never thought I'd live to see this." No one filmed him, but every person there remembered his words. In a classroom in Detroit, a teacher asked her students to describe courage. Hands shot up, fighting, rescuing, leading. But one boy said, "It's when you don't run, even when no one's clapping." The teacher smiled. "Where'd you learn that?" He held up a printout of the mural, the cane, the stance, the silhouette. "I see it on my way to school." Strathmore's name reappeared in the headlines one last time, not for a capture, not for a confession, but in a whistleblower deposition leaked to the press. The document detailed how internal operatives, under Strathmore's guidance, had attempted a psychological neutralization strategy against Ward, citing terms like containment through invalidation and public perception modulation. The leak went viral. But instead of outrage, the response was different. People simply nodded. They already knew. Ward's legacy had ceased to be a story told. It had become something lived. In coffee shops, veterans bought meals for strangers. In courthouses, judges offered therapy alternatives for first-time offenders who were former service members. In churches, pastors cited Ward's silence as a form of holy protest. Even in prisons, inmates requested books about military ethics. The ripple didn't scream, it spread, like memory does. And at a bookstore in Vermont, a girl browsing poetry found a page with no title, no author, just one phrase, still standing even when bent. She turned to the clerk. "Who wrote this?" The clerk shrugged. "It showed up one morning. We kept it." The girl folded the page, slipped it into her backpack, and walked out into the cold, standing a little taller. The clouds over Virginia were soft that morning, like ash gently suspended in air. In the quiet foothills just beyond Ward's cabin, the wind carried the faint scent of pine and earth. No headlines, no cameras, just the weight of memory hanging in the air. Ward sat on the back porch, a thick blanket draped over his shoulders, a carved wooden cane resting by his chair. His hands, once steady enough to hold formation in crossfire, now trembled when holding a cup of tea. Time, even for the strongest, never asked permission, but his eyes, those hadn't dimmed. They were still sharp, watchful, not of enemies, but of truth. A knock on the front door echoed gently. He didn't move. Instead, a voice called around from the side gate. "Samuel, it's Reggie." Ward rose slowly, stepped down the porch, cane tapping each wooden plank with the rhythm of purpose. At the gate stood a man in his early 30s, broad-shouldered, holding a worn manila envelope. Reggie Alston, son of a soldier who once served under Ward. They shook hands without a word. Reggie looked down briefly, then said, "I think you should see this." Inside the envelope were dozens of printed letters, emails, handwritten notes, scanned documents, all from people across the country, young activists, aging veterans, school principals, librarians. Each one shared a story of how someone chose to stand still, to speak without shouting, to hold dignity like a shield. Ward flipped through them slowly. When he reached the last page, he paused. It was a photograph of a boy about 10, standing alone in front of a city hall with a hand-painted sign that simply read, "We stand because he did." Ward placed the photo on the table, pressed 2 fingers against it. Reggie asked, "Was it worth it?" Ward didn't answer directly. Instead, he turned to the window. "I spent years learning how to disappear," he said, "then spent the rest proving I hadn't." Reggie nodded. "They're organizing a nationwide gathering next month. All those connected to Ember Vale. Families, friends, even some who were never told what really happened. They want you to speak." Ward gave a small, tired smile. "I already have." At the gathering in Phoenix, they set out hundreds of empty chairs. One for every operative lost in unacknowledged missions. Each chair bore a name, some real, some only recently declassified, some marked simply unknown. No microphone was needed. People stood, shared stories, read passages. A girl played a violin solo that her grandfather once taught her before deployment. A mother held up a telegram that had arrived 10 years too late. Still, no sign of Ward. Until the final moment, as the sun began to drop, someone noticed a figure standing alone on the edge of the hill, barely visible against the sky. He didn't wave, he didn't speak, but his silhouette was unmistakable, cane in hand, back straight, still, and every person on that hill stood with him. Back in Elridge, the small southern town where this began, a new mural was unveiled in the community center. It wasn't grand or towering, just a small painted panel above the main entrance. It showed Ward seated under a tree, 2 children at his feet, pointing at the horizon. No words, none needed. The press tried one last time to capture an exclusive. They sent letters, left voicemails, even approached locals, but Ward never responded. Eventually, a major outlet ran a blank front page with a single caption, "We tried to speak." But he'd already said everything. Years later, when a museum dedicated to hidden service was finally built, there was a small section marked simply "Witness." In it sat only 3 items: a cane, a worn coat, a note written on the back of a diner napkin that read, "Some truths don't shout, they wait." Visitors often lingered in that room longer than any other. In his final years, Ward rarely traveled, but his image moved without him, printed on murals, etched on medallions, carried in the hearts of strangers who knew that change hadn't come from anger, but from immovable clarity. Not with thunder, but with presence. Not with noise, but with silence that refused to be ignored. When Samuel Vincent Ward passed, there was no national announcement, no ceremony, no motorcade, just a single photo posted anonymously to a community board of a chair on a porch empty but for a folded coat and cane. Within days, that image was shared millions of times, and on the day of his burial across cities and counties and states, thousands stood still at noon. No speeches, no banners, just silence, because that's how he lived, and that's how he changed everything. Still, this was the story of Samuel Vincent Ward, a man who never chased titles, never asked for cameras, and never needed to shout to be heard. A man whose silence made more noise than any rally, any press conference, or any televised debate. In the face of humiliation, wrongful arrest, and systemic injustice, he didn't retaliate. He didn't lash out. He stood calm, resolute, unshaken. And that choice, one quiet man's decision to hold his ground, sparked a wave that moved a nation. Ward reminded us all that sometimes the most powerful form of resistance isn't loud or violent. It's the stillness that refuses to yield. It's the integrity that won't be bargained. It's the dignity that endures, even when stripped of medals, recognition, or support. He was not a politician, not a preacher, not a symbol. He was a witness, a mirror, and he made the world look at itself. From courtrooms to classrooms, from quiet porches to city murals, his legacy has traveled not by words but by example. Veterans stood taller, civilians grew more compassionate, institutions were forced to remember. And most importantly, silence, his silence, became a language of healing. This wasn't just a story about race or patriotism. It was about the human spirit, about reclaiming voice through stillness, about proving that legacy isn't written in headlines but in the quiet lives we change, one act of grace at a time. At Heart Tales, we share stories that echo in your soul, stories that ask not only what happened, but why it mattered. And Samuel's story matters, because in honoring him, we honor the overlooked, the unseen, the silent pillars of strength that hold up entire histories without ever asking for credit. So we ask you now, what did you learn from Samuel? What part of his journey lives in you? And when the world tries to rush you, to erase you, to redefine you, will you remember him? Will you stand still? Thank you for watching this episode of Heart Tales. If this story moved you, inspired you, or even just made you pause, please give us a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this one. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? What part of Samuel's story resonated the most? Leave a comment below and join the conversation. And before you go, take a moment, stand in silence, not for us, not even for Samuel, but for someone you know who's still waiting to be seen. This is Heart Tales, where every silence has a story and every story leaves a mark. Thank you. Stay grounded, stay kind, and remember, change doesn't always roar. Sometimes it stands still. Thank you for watching this episode of Veteran Biker. If this story struck a chord, inspired you, or simply made you stop and think, give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that ride deeper than the surface. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Which part of Samuel's story stayed with you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Join the ride, join the conversation. And before you go, take a breath. Hold a moment of stillness, not for us, not even for Samuel, but for someone out there, still waiting to be heard. This is Veteran Biker, where the quiet moments speak loudest, and where every story leaves its road mark. Thank you. Ride true, stay steady, and remember, not every change roars down the highway. Sometimes it rolls in, silent and unstoppable.